On the night of May 7, 2025, India launched one of the most audacious military strikes in South Asian history. Missiles crossed borders, air bases burned, the world held its breath. And yet, not a single major power stood up and said, "India is right." Not the United States, not the European Union, not Russia. Not even India's closest strategic partners in the Quad, Australia and Japan, said a word in India's favor. Think about that for a moment. India, a nation of 1.4 billion people, the world's fifth largest economy, a democracy, struck military targets inside a nuclear-armed neighbor, and the world went silent. Why? What does that silence tell us about the real nature of geopolitics, about alliances, about power? Today, we are going to answer that question. And the answer is going to make you rethink everything you thought you knew about who stands with whom and why. You are watching War and Military History, where every conflict has a cause, every border has a cost, and every war leaves something behind. Let's begin. To understand why the world went silent, we first need to understand what happened. On April 22, 2025, gunmen attacked tourists in Pahalgam, Kashmir. 26 civilians were killed, most of them Hindu pilgrims. India blamed Pakistan. Specifically, it blamed the Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed, two militant groups that have long been linked to Pakistan's intelligence services. 2 weeks later, India struck. On the night of May 6th to 7th, Indian Air Force jets, cruise missiles, and drones crossed into Pakistani territory and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. 9 terror camps were targeted. Then, in a dramatic escalation, India struck 11 Pakistani Air Force bases. Runways were cratered. Radar installations were destroyed. Military infrastructure that Pakistan had built over decades was damaged in a matter of hours. Pakistan retaliated. Its jets scrambled, drones were launched, air battles were fought over disputed skies. For 88 hours, 2 nuclear-armed nations fought the most significant conventional war South Asia had seen since 1971. Then, and this is crucial, it was not India or Pakistan that announced the ceasefire. It was United States President Donald Trump who posted on social media that he had brokered a deal. That single fact tells you everything about the geopolitical reality of this conflict. The two countries were fighting, but the world was managing them. Let us start with the United States, India's most important strategic partner of the 21st century. For 2 decades, Washington and New Delhi have been moving closer. Trade, defense deals, the Quad alliance, shared concerns about China. The relationship was described as the defining partnership of our time. And yet, during Operation Sindoor, America did not condemn Pakistan, not once. In fact, American officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, called both sides and urged restraint. Both sides, as if India and Pakistan were equally responsible for what had happened. Why? 3 reasons. First, Pakistan's nuclear weapons. The United States has always maintained a careful policy when it comes to nuclear-armed states. Washington does not want to back Pakistan into a corner. A desperate, nuclear-armed Pakistan is the most dangerous thing American strategists can imagine. So, America played the role of firefighter, not judge. Second, China. Pakistan is China's closest ally in South Asia. Any American statement strongly backing India would have been seen as a direct challenge to Beijing. And in 2025, Washington was not ready for that fight. Trade wars, economic pressures, Taiwan. America had too many fires to handle another front. Third, Afghanistan and the region. The United States still needs Pakistani cooperation on counterterrorism, on regional intelligence, on access routes. You don't burn a partner, even a complicated one, completely. So America stayed silent, called both sides. And then Trump took credit for the ceasefire. India got no backing, only a phone call telling it to stop.
Now let us talk about the Quad, the quadrilateral security dialogue, which India, the United States, Australia, and Japan formed specifically to counter Chinese influence in the Indo-Pacific. India's strategic community had invested enormous hope in this alliance. The thinking was simple. If China or China's allies ever threatened India, the Quad partners would stand with New Delhi. Operation Sindoor revealed a very uncomfortable truth. Australia said nothing. Japan said nothing. Both countries watched the 88-hour war unfold. Both countries knew exactly what was happening, and both chose silence. Why? Because the Quad is not a military alliance. It was never a military alliance. It is a diplomatic forum, a conversation, a signal to China, but not a commitment to fight alongside India in a crisis. Australia and Japan have their own calculations. Both countries have deep economic ties with China. Both countries feared that taking India's side publicly would antagonize Beijing. Japan, already dealing with its own territorial pressures from China and North Korea, was not about to add another adversary. Australia, with billions in trade flowing to and from China, made the same calculation. The Quad partners essentially told India through their silence, "We like you, we want to work with you, but this is your problem. Handle it yourself." This was a stunning revelation. India had spent years building these relationships, hosting summits, signing agreements, conducting joint military exercises. And at the moment of crisis, the partners blinked. Geopolitics is not friendship, it is interest. And in May 2025, no Quad partner's interest required standing beside India. For decades, Russia and India shared what both governments called a special and privileged strategic partnership. India is one of Russia's largest arms customers. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union backed India diplomatically at critical moments, including during the 1971 war that created Bangladesh. But in 2025, Russia was deep in its own war in Ukraine. It needed Pakistan's neutrality and influence in Central Asia. It needed China's economic support to survive Western sanctions. And Pakistan, despite its Western-leaning military establishment, had carefully maintained ties with Moscow. So Russia also stayed silent. This was particularly painful for India, because India had also stayed largely silent during the Ukraine war, refusing to condemn Russia, continuing to buy Russian oil, abstaining on UN votes specifically to preserve this relationship. India got nothing back. The lesson of Operation Sindoor for Indian strategists was brutal and clear. You cannot bank goodwill in geopolitics. Countries do not remember favors. They respond to interests. And in 2025, Russia's interests did not require backing India. Now, China's position was perhaps the least surprising, but the most consequential. China is Pakistan's all-weather strategic ally. Those are the actual words Beijing uses. China has invested over $60 billion in Pakistan through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, known as CPEC. Pakistan's ports give China access to the Arabian Sea. Pakistan's stability is essential to Chinese strategic planning. So, when India attacked Pakistan, China did what every strategist expected. It backed Pakistan.
Chinese officials called for restraint, but they made clear that they stood with Islamabad. Chinese state media framed India as the aggressor. China's military put its Western theater on heightened alert. But here is where it gets complex. China did not want a full-scale war. A war between India and Pakistan, two nuclear powers, could spiral out of control in ways that would damage Chinese interests too. CPEC projects would be endangered. Trade routes would be disrupted. The region would destabilize. So China's message to Pakistan was, "We support you politically, but don't escalate beyond the point of no return." And China's message to the world was, "India is a destabilizing force. This is why we have concerns about Indian aggression." China used Operation Sindoor to build a narrative that India, not Pakistan, was the reckless actor. That narrative found audiences in parts of Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. India won the military exchange. China won the information war.
One might have expected the Islamic world to rally behind Pakistan, a fellow Muslim-majority nation. The reality was more nuanced and more revealing. Saudi Arabia and the UAE, Pakistan's traditional financial backers, did not take Pakistan's side publicly. Both countries have been building economic and strategic relationships with India in recent years. India is one of the largest destinations for Gulf investment. Millions of Indian workers send remittances back from Saudi Arabia and the UAE. The economic relationship is too important to sacrifice for Pakistani solidarity. Turkey, which has been increasingly vocal about Muslim causes globally, did express sympathy for Pakistan. But Turkey's voice carries limited strategic weight. Iran, which borders Pakistan and has complex ties with both Islamabad and New Delhi, stayed carefully neutral. The Arab League issued a statement calling for calm, but did not name India or condemn its actions. What this revealed was that the concept of Islamic solidarity, while powerful in street-level sentiment, barely moves the needle in state-level diplomacy. Gulf states made their calculations based on oil revenues, investment flows, and strategic alliances with the West. Pakistan was on its own. This was a moment of genuine isolation for Islamabad. Its traditional supporters were absent. Its new friends, China, Turkey, offered words, but not action. Pakistan had fought the war alone, and diplomatically, it stood alone too.
But here is the part that Indian strategists must confront honestly. India's diplomatic failure during Operation Sindoor was not only the world's fault. India also failed to prepare the ground. In the 2 weeks between the Pahalgam massacre and the military strikes, India did not build a global coalition. It did not present a detailed dossier of evidence to the United Nations Security Council. It did not brief allied governments thoroughly before the strikes. It did not coordinate messaging with friendly media organizations around the world. India struck militarily with precision. Diplomatically, it struck nothing. Pakistan, which has long understood information warfare better than its military capabilities would suggest, moved faster. Within hours of the Indian strikes, Pakistani officials were on international television framing the narrative. Pakistani social media operations flooded global platforms with claims of Indian aggression, inflated enemy losses, and images designed to shape perception. India, by contrast, remained restrained and quiet in the international information space, a habit from decades of democratic caution. By the time India presented its evidence, the first narrative had already set in many corners of the world. Military superiority does not automatically translate to narrative superiority. India learned this the hard way. So what does all of this mean? Operation Sindoor revealed several uncomfortable truths about the world we live in today. First, There are no permanent allies, only permanent interests. Every country that stayed silent during Operation Sindoor did so because silence served their interests. India must accept this reality and plan accordingly. Second, nuclear weapons change everything. Pakistan's nuclear deterrent was the single most important factor shaping every other country's response. It prevented anyone from backing India too strongly. It kept the conflict contained. And it forced a ceasefire before India could achieve all its strategic objectives. Third, information warfare is as important as military warfare. In the modern era, the country that controls the narrative controls the aftermath. India must invest as seriously in its diplomatic and communication infrastructure as it does in its missiles and aircraft. Fourth, the world is multipolar and no one is in charge. The United States no longer has the ability or the willingness to impose order on every conflict. China is rising, but not yet dominant. The result is a world where medium powers fight their wars largely alone and must be prepared to do so. India demonstrated extraordinary military capability during Operation Sindoor. The BrahMos missiles, the precision strikes, the air superiority achieved over Pakistani airspace. These were genuine achievements that changed the regional military balance permanently. But a war is not just won on the battlefield. It is won in conference rooms, on television screens, in the diplomatic cables that flow between capitals, in the hours and days after the guns go quiet. That is the lesson of Operation Sindoor. And it is a lesson that will shape South Asian strategy for decades to come.
History never asks permission before it happens. In May 2025, two nuclear-armed nations fought an 88-hour war. Missiles flew, bases burned, pilots died. And the world watched, carefully, quietly, calculatingly. No one sided with India, not because India was wrong, but because the world does not work on right and wrong. It works on interest, on calculation, on the cold mathematics of power. That is the truth of Operation Sindoor. And that truth will echo through every war room, every foreign ministry, every military academy in South Asia for generations. You have been watching War and Military History, where every conflict has a cause, every border has a cost, and every war leaves something behind. Subscribe and stay with us, because history is never truly over.